If you're peeping in, hi, Buolo. Okay, it's 9:30. So I am going to... We are now closing the screening. Okay. I'm ready to go. Okay. Thanks, Craig. Thanks, NoBudge, for doing this. This is cool. I feel funny, but this is cool. I have wrestling paraphernalia here. Wait, where is it? Of course. Spinner belt. I got that at WrestleMania. For anyone who cares. Craig seems to be asking me the first question, which is very exciting. I need music. Music. Okay, so the first question is, how did I come to know the guys in the Federation? Uh-oh. Whoops. How did I come... Someone says I'm a loser. That's awesome. How did you come to know the guys in the Federation, and how did you get them interested in doing a movie? Well, Chris Solar, who, if you just watched the movie or if you've seen it before, is the guy who's playing the quote-unquote gay character. Solar is gay. He's like the rock and roll star, kind of like a, sort of an 80s ripoff, cheesy character. And he's my cousin. So I've always wanted to make a movie with him because of his story. His story, which is, that he was born without a belly button, which is extraordinary. And when he was a kid, we could not, we kind of, never could roughhouse with him, because I was, the older kid of a group of, he's my cousin, so I was an older kid, and he was, the same age as my younger brother and another cousin, and we'd fight and, play sports in the yard, and we could never play with him because he had this situation where he was born without a belly button, and he was very much a wuss. And so we made fun of him constantly. And then one day he's like, I want to be a professional wrestler. And I thought for sure that he was going to die, which luckily has not yet happened. But so I've always wanted to make this movie. I'm a lifelong wrestling fan, not ironic wrestling fan. So I've always wanted to make a wrestling film. I've always wanted Chris to have a film about his journey and sort of that whole thing. And so I was watching, I think I was watching Sweetgrass at a movie theater upstate New York. And I think it's a fine movie, but I was really dreadfully bored watching Sweetgrass because I was supposed to love it and I really didn't love it. And I just conceived of the movie. I left the theater and I immediately had the whole thing mapped out, the week in the life of these guys. I called Chris on the phone, and we by the end of the day it was pretty much set in motion. So thanks to Sweetgrass for being not as exciting as I was hoping it would be, and so I came up with a movie. And then I met all the guys on the phone, and then just talked to them on the phone and came up with a sort of plan to shoot for a week. And once we sort of executed that plan, we went for it. And we didn't meet Gabe. We didn't meet Gabe until the first night. So he sort of became maybe the main character-ish, sort of. Some people disagree that he's the main character, but he became one of the main characters, and we didn't meet him until the second night, really, that we were there. or we didn't really. I guess we met him the first night, but we didn't know that he was the guy that was going to sort of give the movie its thrust in some ways until the second night. So it was really a sort of something that was a lifetime in the making, but also sort of seat of your pants, like figuring shit out as you go, kind of thing. So that's a long-winded answer to one question. I'm going to put some music on while I wait for your next questions. I think we should listen to... Oh, we should listen to wrestling themes is what we should listen to. Right? Everyone agree with me here? We'll keep them quiet-ish. Let's see. The next question from someone is just, I think, an anonymous user. Wait, hold on. Is what are the guys doing now? Hold on. Yes, Ultimate Warrior. Okay. The guys. What are the guys doing now? They are still going strong. I mean, one of the things that's happened actually is a couple guys left and came back, and I mean, as you can imagine from seeing the movie, if you saw it, you know, they've turned good and bad and switched back and forth. At one point, J-Prep and Chris Solar had an amazing tag team called Great Awesome Yeah, which is GAY for gay, which is pretty awesome. And they came out and played a flamboyant gay couple, basically. And then for a while, Chris Solar turned good, and then the next question was, why don't you like sheep? I love sheep. But anyway, so basically they you know, they're still going strong. Zayn has left being the second in command guy. He's no longer in that position. He left to go to travel the circuit, sort of like what J-Prep was describing. Gabe went through a lot of ups and downs. Gabe basically at one point was like actually had to go to jail for things related to things in the movie. So they all had sort of ups and downs, but they're plugging on, and they keep having shows every 2 weeks. So they're doing the same thing. So I'll skip the question about why I don't like sheep, because I love sheep. But maybe this user can explain the question, because I love sheep. I don't understand. What did the guys think of the finished movie, and how did you screen it for them? Is Craig's next question. They loved it. I mean, it was basically we had an amazing screening. We had an amazing screening on Thanksgiving Eve, maybe. And we got really drunk and watched the movie, and it was one of the most amazing sort of experiences that I've had with a film, and they sort of were clapping. You can just imagine like the sort of a lot of the emotion attached to it, because they really did feel like this was their chance, or like they were surprised, I think, that I didn't make fun of them at all, and that I was really like totally into what they were doing, and I kind of made them heroes. I think that's pretty clear. Yeah, they loved it, and so that screening went amazingly well. And afterwards was followed by speeches, and then each of the wrestlers basically came up to me privately and said like, "Hey, when can we see the cut with all my footage in it?" You know, which is a very typical pro wrestler mentality. So yeah, the first screening with them was amazing. Okay, so how is working with the wrestlers different / the same as working with actors? Well, I make, oh wait, hold on. Yeah, I'll answer that question and I'll go back to Craig's previous question. Well, I don't know. I mean, I make documentary films. I'm currently making a film called Actress, which is with an actor. And yeah, I've never really worked with actors except for like on small shoots. So as a documentary filmmaker, it's sort of weird to be working with an actor now who has sort of all the thoughts and feelings of of an actor. Basically, she wants to be treated right on screen, which is completely different than people who are like, I don't, film me and you can film my life and we'll make it happen, whatever. These guys were somewhere in between because they were acting, but they were also being themselves. So it was sort of it's what I'm basically, the thing that I'm interested in for wrestling is the same thing I'm interested in with documentary filmmaking, which is the way you perform reality, essentially. Like there's my favorite wrestling writer is this guy who goes by AKA the Masked Man, and he calls it the unreality of pro wrestling. And I think there's a sort of unreality of documentary filmmaking too, which has a lot to do with performing yourself and performing like your identities. And one of the things that excited me about making this movie was that it was a way to explore that in a fun way and not be so serious. So yeah, that's basically that. How big is the regional circuit, asks Craig. The regional circuit is, the problem is really there's so many levels now. And basically there's like, at the top you have the WWE, and then just below that you have TNA, Impact Wrestling, and then you have Ring of Honor and things like that, basically. So there's a bunch of sort of tiers to that, to the whole thing, basically, after that. So where these guys are is literally the bottom, like literally the bottom of the thing. They're kind of safe there because they can do what they want to do without having to resort to some of the things that you have to do, which JPrep does a good job of describing. He does a good job of describing his experience there. So, but then there's like this sort of level above them, which is this circuit that people can go out on. And I'm not an expert on how the circuit works, but basically every town essentially in the South, among other places, has these sort of small, has these small federations and whatever, and they play to sometimes bigger audiences than you see in the MWF, and sometimes much bigger audiences, like places like CZW, or like there's a Billy Corgan has a thing in Chicago, which would be considered part of the circuit, and wrestlers can go from town to town to town, usually locally, and do it. But there's literally, like I said in the beginning, there's text at the beginning of the film that there's literally thousands of these across the country. What would you say? The next question is, what would you say is the common thread between the characters in your film? What are the defining characteristics of a pro wrestler? Do you think you have to be broken? No, I think the defining characteristic of a pro wrestler is a couple things. I think one is athleticism and sort of wanting to do something physical. But I think that's, athleticism can take on different forms. Obviously, some of these guys are not like complete athletes, or they're like athletes in a different way. Like a guy like Pitt could play football. He can't, but he's so huge that like he's got limited options because of his size in terms of being an athlete. So I think they want to have some athletic thing in their lives, right? But most importantly, I think the defining characteristic is this sort of a need to express yourself in the same way that what's the defining characteristic of being an actor in plays, or this is community theater for those guys. And there's just no real difference between community theater and what they're doing. The tradition is completely different, and they mark themselves differently in that tradition, but what they're doing is totally the same. So that's really what it is. I think these are guys that want to express themselves, and pro wrestling comes without some of the pretensions of being an actor that maybe they would not necessarily identify with. So this is a way to express yourself, to identify with performing and performance and whatever, without being an actor, which is maybe from like culturally a different thing for them. So I also think that a lot of people just want to be famous, and they want to be like in the spotlight, and you see this happening to people and you want to be a part of it. So it's no different than any other sort of artistic thing where you're expressing yourself, but you want it to be bigger. So, okay, so Craig asks, and do any of these guys have a cutoff time set for themselves when they know they'll throw in the towel because of age or enough time if they haven't hit the level of success they want, etc.? I don't think that it really works like they think of it in age. I think it's more like you basically, like, just like anything else, you work as hard as you can to get to as high a level as you can, and once you're at that level, you basically, you think about it and like, do you want to take a risk to go to the next level? So I think for a guy like Chris, he knows that his body type is not going to necessarily get him 3 steps beyond, but he has wrestled and he continues to wrestle in bigger areas. A guy like Zayn, who's got a good look and is built right, or a guy like Pitt, or, you know, a number of these guys, they might say, like, it's worth risking, you know, leaving the comfort of the MWF for a minute to go try something else. So I don't think it's an age thing. I think it's more like, are they willing to take the next risk? Because it's like any other entertainment profession where the chances of success, as big as you want, is small. So it's like, it's the same thing with being a documentary filmmaker. Like, if I made Fake It and it sucked, like, would I be actively pursuing my next movie? I might be looking for my next, thing to do. And it has nothing to do with age. It has to do with success level and, like, whether I'm willing to risk putting myself out there and trying to get the next level kind of thing. So, everybody has to pay their bills. A lot of these guys don't have families, and that's starting to change. And I think families obviously change a lot families change things for a lot of people. But a guy like David Hayes, who's the father, David Hayes, in the movie, he was pretty much done with wrestling very soon after the movie was over, and he hasn't really gone back except for briefly. But his son was, in high school, so it's like, but I think family did finally catch up to him. So a lot of times it's family more than it's age. A question is, there's footage from other matches, such as a bloody cage match. How did they feel about that part of their family-friendly image? And that's Aaron from Twitter. So Aaron, who was really nice to say something nice on Twitter. Thank you very much, Aaron. And it's fun to talk about wrestling with you. They don't think that there's a dividing line. Basically, blood in a wrestling match is not not family friendly. Like, they don't use blood unless they feel like they, in a storyline reason, have to. So they're really, they're old school in a lot of ways. They're old school in a lot of meaning, like, they want to make sure that the championship match goes on last, and blood has to be a storytelling thing. It can't just be used for shock and awe or whatever. So they feel justified in telling that story, whether or not we think it's family friendly or not. I think they know that the kids are prepared for a bloody kind of thing, and the blood is very controlled, and it gets a little rough, but obviously the family friendly thing is a bit of a stickler point, because sometimes it seems completely not family friendly, and then sometimes you would wonder about, like, how could you say this is family friendly versus this or whatever. But I think it's sort of the self-contained universe of wrestling defines what they mean by that, I think. Okay, the next question is, there is a lot of strange conversations regarding homosexuality in the movie. Was this something you wanted to highlight in editing, or was it just something that came through? Well, that's, like, I think the issue, the homosexuality talk, which sometimes goes right toward, homophobic, no doubt about it, is interesting, because I don't think these guys are homophobic. I think that's a cultural thing where when you're in the South, you talk more like that, and which is not an excuse for the behavior or not an excuse for what people say. But what I like about the the use of that stuff in the film is that they say these things, and then there's such tenderness and love that they obviously have for each other, and then when they get in the ring, they take off their clothes and they wrestle, which, and you know, no one would ever deny that wrestling is homoerotic. There's no sort of question about that. And that's gone, you know, back from the beginning. That's been an unspoken part of what wrestling sort of is. So to me, like, saying wrestling is homoerotic is like the most boring thing you could say. So when I didn't add any dialogue, obviously. This is all the homo stuff comes from them, you know, and especially because Chris's character was directly playing with some of those ideas. So I liked how Chris's character plays with them. I like that he elicits this chant of Solar is gay, and that becomes this weird cathartic thing, which is sort of really dark and twisted, and also really not twisted because everyone's in on the joke. Obviously, if there was a gay guy sitting in the front row, which there might be, he might be closeted or he might be open, I don't know. He may feel completely different about that than I do as a straight guy. But for me, it's interesting. It gets all complicated and interesting and weird. But the truth is, in the idea of bringing it out in the editing, actually, we tried to tamp it down a little bit in the editing. There was a couple scenes where they would just say like gay, 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 this thing, you know, and you couldn't. Eventually, they just started to look worse and worse. So I actually edited it down, but I wanted their way of speaking to be in the movie as is, and I think it brings out something that I can't really explain about language and culture and in the South that means a lot to me. And it's obviously not just in the South, but I think since we were filming in the South, this is very much about the South. And yeah, so I don't know. I mean, we didn't bring it out in editing. It wasn't like, let's make them sound more homophobic. That was not ever a goal. The next question is, can you talk about the crew that helped you make this movie? Well, basically it was me, my cinematographer, co-cinematographer on this film, Sean Price Williams, who shot many other films, and then my brother, who I believe might be my brother might be watching now. So shout out to my brother if he's watching. Basically, he would drive us around, hold the boom pole, and do whatever, and I would hold a camera or hold the boom and try to get them to talk, and Sean would hold the camera, and if anyone on here knows Sean, would complain constantly, which is what he does. But yeah, so that was it. I mean, the crew was just us three, and it was sort of, that's how I prefer, especially when you're making something. We literally shot this 99% of this movie shot over 1 week. But I do want to point out that my brother did get, Sean and I are, totally, cinematographer, filmmaker, whatever. But the last shot of the movie, I think after the last shot of the very last shot of the movie was shot by my brother. The slow motion shot of David leaving the cage, and I think it's one of the best shots of the movie. So that's the crew that made it. So very, very small, very family affair situation. Okay, so Craig asks, we see a lot of practice rehearsal, but how do these guys start to learn how to do the moves, hit their backs in the right way, take a pile driver or suplex, etc. They train each other. So they've come from real, Brandon Powers was trained by, I don't remember who he was trained by, but he was trained by a real trainer. A lot of these guys came from real training. David Hayes was trained by a real trainer. Real is not to say that Chris Solar isn't a real trainer, but the guys before him who trained him were trained by, higher level professional wrestlers. Like, Outlaw was trained, and then they started this thing, and then they've sort of started to train each other. So now Chris takes over the training. So it's basically, but that's not atypical. That's how it's always gone. That's how it's always gone. From the beginning. So It's not an atypical situation that the Fed would be training the next generation of people. So, but the lineage goes back to bigger stars or older stars that took to training. So it gets passed down. The next question is: would you be interested in following one of these guys on the circuit as a pseudo sequel? Um, uh, um, yeah. So the I don't know. Yeah, I mean maybe, but like I'm still living with this movie a lot. Which is great. It's so. It's such a special movie to me, and it took so much to get it to where it is, and I kind of would like to follow. I kind of like the idea of documentary sequels because it's a little bit outside the box. Uh-oh, my computer just went to sleep. It's a little bit outside the box because I'm besides a couple of major famous examples, there's not many documentary sequels, but I want to make other movies, and we'll see. But if someone presented a story that was really compelling, then yeah, of course I would consider that. That's actually a great idea. Okay, will you talk about Hojo? This is from it looks like BEEEESS1. Will you talk about Hojo? He seemed interesting, but the film didn't get a chance to go into his personal life. Yeah, Hojo. When you make a movie for a week. A lot of times circumstances just happen wherein some people become more characters and some people become less characters. So Hojo probably would have been a major character, but we couldn't make a filming thing happen because he wasn't really in the same place as everyone else was. So it was a sort of annoying situation because I wanted him to be a bigger character because he's such an important part of he's such an important part of that. Of that group, but his personal life. I mean, basically, he's a hilarious dude who like works in a tattoo shop, I believe, and he's just like constantly hilariously making jokes, and he's like super fun to be around. But what's interesting is like. We chose to film for a week, and a lot of that's a very unconventional way to make a film documentary because usually people follow for like, a long time, and that could have completely changed. I maintain that we got as intimate as we could have with these guys in a week that we would have gotten in a year, and the stories would have just been changed, and we would have had to focus more on the drama. Case in point would be Hojo, who the very next show after we filmed got in a fight with a guy because he was running his mouth, and then he threatened Hojo, and then Hojo got in a fight with him, and then Hojo had like some sort of legal situation connected to that, which would have obviously meant that Hojo would have probably been forced into being one of the main characters because of this dramatic situation. So it's just a total accident that he's not more of a character. But I love that dude. He's legitimately scary in the ring because he can play a badass good guy and a really scary bad guy, and you always believe him because he can be scary, but he's also hilarious. The next question is, I'm making a film about a Japanese handicap pro wrestling league in Tokyo. That sounds cool. Do you think the U.S. amateur pro wrestling scene would feel kinship or just see it as a freak show? Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's a sort of universal kinship among wrestling, no matter what. And I think they all kind of feel like sometimes they're all freak show people, so I think that would make it they would feel some kinship with a handicap pro wrestling league in Tokyo, but at the same time, I don't know. I mean, that's hard to say. You'd like to think that they would feel kinship with the storytelling aspects and the athleticism and the trying to live your dream thing, especially because let's face it, Chris Solar is basically handicapped himself. He's got no belly button and he can speak two sentences, and then he questions himself, and then he looks down at the floor, and I mean that's essentially a handicap himself. And I love him; he's my cousin. But being born without a belly button, that's pretty much handicapped. And I love, that's a joke. But so hopefully they feel some kinship. But my guess is they probably feel a little bit like it's different. Whatever. Okay, so thanks by the way for the viewing. Really fun. Oh, thank you. That's the same person that asked that. That's great. Okay, someone said that they accidentally shut their window and didn't get to see the last 30 minutes. Well, that's a great opportunity for me to say that you can get the movie on iTunes, and I think I get like 13 cents or something if you eventually in 5 years, if people continue to buy it. You can get it on iTunes and Amazon, and the DVD is coming out soon. So for the poor user that didn't get to see the last half hour, maybe you're so intrigued that you will buy it. I don't know. Okay. Craig asks, did the 39-year-old guy end up having any kind of future with the league? No, he was there, I think, for a couple weeks, and then he stopped, which was really sad for me to see. Actually, we filmed for a month later for the credit sequence and some fill-in shots, and he was still there when it's training when we did that. So I was really encouraged. I was really encouraged by that. I thought he was going to actually stick around because he seemed to have a real heart for it and a knack for it, and like his character of Dr. Love just is so awesome. But I don't think he stuck around with it. I think who knows? Maybe I don't know. Maybe being 39 with a peanut allergy and asthma and penicillin allergy and everything else, maybe it caught up to him. And I don't mean that to be mean, but probably did catch up to him at some point. Did you watch other wrestling documentaries such as Beyond the Mat or anything in prep, or did you try to go into it in fresh? And then this nice person says that this is the best wrestling doc I've seen, by the way. That's very nice to say. I don't know if I'm supposed to read compliments, but that makes me feel happy. No, I don't. I've seen every wrestling documentary that I can find, essentially. Like, I like Beyond the Mat, but I guess... If this movie, I feel like this movie has sort of a different feel than most wrestling documentaries. I think it's more cinematic and storytelling and all those other things, without tooting my own horn too much. But like, I felt like the potential was there, and I think Beyond the Mat is a great film in some ways, but in some ways it's like painful because I feel like at one point you just don't want Jake the Snake Roberts' daughter to be put through that anymore, and then you see the kids with Mick Foley. It just brings out this side that it's just hard to watch. I think it's very effective for what it's trying to do, but it's hard to watch for me, and I don't necessarily think that's what... I'm not interested in the abuse aspect of wrestling. I'm interested in the storytelling, character creation, and the traditions that get carried on, and the way people take it very, very seriously because it's an art form. And I feel like that's sort of missing from that movie. I love the the Hitman Hart Wrestling with Shadows film. I think that's the best pro wrestling documentary ever made. Except for this amazing film that everybody should look for called La Lutte, which is a French-Canadian documentary from the 60s, which is only like 40 minutes long. I think you might even be able to find it on YouTube. But it's essentially, the film that I wanted to make a version of in my way. But like, it sort of tells a sort of more direct cinema approach to wrestling, and you get to see a lot of the repetitions and stuff that I found sort of mesmerizing. And you get at some of the levels of reality without going too far. So. Those are the movies that I've seen like the backyard wrestling movies and I feel like if someone made the great wrestling movie, I wouldn't have made this movie because I wouldn't have had a need to, because it's really my attempt to like add something to the canon of wrestling movies. I like The Wrestler, the Darren Aronofsky movie, but I don't love it, and it had some things that just made me like cringe, not because of like, oh, it's not real wrestling. Like the wrestling stuff is actually pretty great, but just like it's got shitty indie drama crap that happens in it too much. Besides that, it's a good wrestling movie. So that's it. Craig asks, there's an incredible amount of footage shots in the film. How long did it take to edit? I think we only had like 3 months to edit, but I mean, shooting for a week, and because I shot everything, I'm either holding the camera or I'm there. We only had 45, no, like maybe 50 hours of footage, and that's not that much for a doc. And you know, it was it was it was basically like 3 months, I think, to edit. And the whole we got to a certain point. The other good thing is that the structure is there goes my thing again. The structure is such that, like, I knew it was not necessarily in order the way it went. It's not necessarily cut in order, but I knew it was going to be Sunday through Saturday. So I knew that there was a structure built in the way we shot it. So because when you make a film in a week, you have the limitations are dramatic. So you have to really, know what kind of story you're trying to tell. So that made the editing process easier, and it went by fine at 3 months. I'm about to spend the same amount of time editing straight for my next movie, and it's much bigger in terms of like trying to pull it all together, and so I'm scared, but I think I can do it because this worked out fine. The interesting thing in the editing, we got to a 3-hour cut, and I was like, "There's no way I can cut a frame of this." And a lot of friends helped me along the way, convinced me that we can't make a 3-hour Fake It So Real. Thank God for them. I'm willing to answer questions as long as you have them. The next question is, did you find that the wrestlers were sort of always in character when you were trying to film their everyday lives? They all seemed incredibly comfortable with the camera. I think they're comfortable. I think they're comfortable with the camera. I think that's true, and I think that's a couple reasons. I think one is if you can't make people comfortable on camera, then that's that's your sort of number one talent as a documentary filmmaker, is being able to make people feel comfortable on camera. I may make people feel completely comfortable in every other aspect of my life, but I have to make them calm down and feel natural and feel cared for and loved and et cetera, or I'm a shitty filmmaker and nothing will work. So that's the one thing I would like to say. But obviously they're comfortable because they are self-promoting themselves the whole time. And I don't think you can make a film about another group of people in a week and get such good stuff, because I feel like the self-promotional aspect of the whole thing made them come alive in a way. Like, they're trying to, in wrestling terms, trying to get themselves over for the camera. So J-Prep is very comfortable talking about his real life. Tears come to his eyes. He says some racially insensitive comments. He's obviously comfortable with everybody in the room. And completely at home, but at the same time, so it's it's real, that's real emotion when he's talking about like losing a child. But at the same time, he's totally trying to get the story of J-Prep over for what he sees as an opportunity, which is there's a guy in his house with a camera. So I think that's a very interesting side of the film, and I think for me it brings out what I'm interested in with documentary filmmaking, which is how does reality get performed? There's a movie opening, the classic great film Portrait of Jason, which is opening in New York on Friday, with a re-release print from a film that I haven't seen in so long. I can't wait to see it. But it's basically like there's a long tradition of these sort of things in documentary filmmaking, which is ideas of performing yourself or performing your identity and et cetera, et cetera. I think Frederick Wiseman's films are full of performances. And he very, very, very subtly plays with performance. So I'm interested in that, and I was always convinced that that a wrestling documentary could bring out aspects of documentary storytelling and reality in a way that maybe other things couldn't. I don't know if we were successful. Maybe if we filmed longer, we would have been more successful. Maybe we could have done a better job by not sticking to whatever happened in this 1 week, but I think it comes through somewhat. And I think J-Prep is a great example of it. The The next question is from Craig. In essays you've written and on social media, you're a voice for ways in which documentary cinema should and can expand beyond typical forms, pure verite, purely talking head, etc. Did you set any particular goals before shooting this film in line with that? No, I mean, not any more than what I just said. I mean, that, I'm flattered by the question because the question is implying that this shit that I spew when I'm talking, trying to figure out what I'm doing is registering as some sort of theoretical stuff. Basically, when I was a film student, I came up with essentially one idea, which I have stuck to, which is that John Cassavetes made documentaries about acting. And it's sort of like when that happened in my head when I was like 20 or whatever it was, and I had not heard that sort of expressed in that way, I sort of became convinced that these lines of documentary and fiction can really be played with, and that the essential difference is how we're presenting them, not what they are, and that films are films. I'm passionate about documentaries. I like talking head documentaries, and I like plenty of things that are interview based. I like plenty of things that are conventional. I think you can make a conventional documentary that's as riveting a story as you can see in movies. I think documentaries in general are more interesting than fiction films. But I do think that there's a conversation happening, hopefully based on technology being more available, and based on like success of things like what they call mumblecore stuff, basically performing yourself with your friends, and then with low budget filmmaking techniques, that immediately is documentary filmmaking too. So I think that the walls are sort of breaking down, and not breaking down. They've always been broken down in some ways, because the best filmmaking on both sides of the fiction, non-fiction sort of continuum have always sort of spoken to each other. I feel like like a Godard film, is often the best sort of hybrid thing you could see. But I think they're breaking down more. Like I do think people pick up cameras and they stop really considering whether it's documentary or whether it's fiction. I think they just try to tell stories, and they oftentimes they're either including very personal things, or they're deliberately saying everyone's making personal things, I want to make something completely not personal. A film like The Act of Killing, which is everyone will be talking about for a while, is amazing in that this man made a film which is really not about his immediate life, but it's all about performance, and it plays with all these same fiction, non-fiction things. So I didn't think about that going into Fake It any more than I was interested in performance. And basically, to me, Fake It So Real is a sort of meditation on documentary performance. That's a totally pretentious way of putting it, but that's what's interesting to me about the film. Besides the real people in the film that really have heart and really care about their art form. The next question's from Craig. My friend Kevin asks the following: is wrestling a cleaner sport than professional cycling? And can it ever be a clean sport, given that you have to look superhuman and do superhuman things, whether injured or not? That's a complicated question, because cycling has the pretension of being real, and the money attached to it is quote unquote real money. And Lance Armstrong made money that a wrestler generally isn't going to make, and he cheated along the way to do it. But Lance Armstrong said something really interesting. I mean, it's probably just him talking out of his ass because he had to cover up for the fact that he was, he's a low down, scoundrel. But basically, Lance Armstrong was like, the Tour de France is a scam. It's always been a scam. They've cheated from the beginning because it's an exhibition, which sounds a lot like pro wrestling. Pro wrestling has none of the pretensions of being a real sport. The reason why pro wrestling even cares about steroids is, one, because steroids are illegal, and Vince McMahon got busted basically for essentially passing out steroids to his wrestlers at that's not entirely historically accurate, but that's the gist of what happened. But also because wrestlers die, which is a lot of times related to abuse of drugs, including steroids and other sort of performance enhancers. So I don't think it's going to ever be clean. There's no doubt that The Rock, for instance, who just came back, The Rock was jacked up on steroids, and I'm sure he wasn't tested. But the movie producers for Hercules or whatever he's doing next probably wanted him to be jacked up on steroids, and Vince McMahon was probably like, you can do whatever you want, you're The Rock. And he blew, all three of his, two WrestleMania main events, he tore muscles from his body because he's got an unhealthy amount of muscle on his frame. And there's only a couple reasons why that would kind of happen. But at the same time, like, I don't know, like, I don't want wrestlers dying because it makes me feel very, very bad as a fan of the art of seeing guys die in their 40s and 50s and sometimes 30s at shocking rates is very hard for me to take. But at the same time, it's a performance. It's a performance. So like sometimes that's what people have to do to get themselves over. And who am I to tell them not to do it when that's what could make them a whole lot of money for their family? So it's a very tricky thing. I mean, luckily, but the steroid thing, I wanted to sidestep that completely because, the good thing about making Fake It the way we made it is that it didn't, none of that stuff came up because of the nature of the movie. Like, we didn't have to talk about any of that because these guys aren't doing that kind of stuff. So, which was a gift to me because I didn't want to have to talk about any of that. It's just not what I wanted to talk about for wrestling. The next question is, were you planning on focusing on Gabriel before he had the match that stole the show, or did that moment make you realize the amazing arc you had? That's a totally awesome question because we weren't sure, and basically it might have been just because Sean was unbelievably negative the entire time we were filming, but that's typical of Sean. I wasn't convinced the whole time that we had a movie. But I think that that's a lot of times when you're making a documentary, you really don't know, like, is this going to come together? But in the middle of Gabe's match, Sean and I dropped our cameras because we were both filming, and we were like, "Oh man, this is a movie! Like, we've got the arc now. Like, no matter what else happens, it's a movie." Because it seemed at the time like the Outlaw injury might be too much of a stretch for the narrative, and I didn't know what narrative we were going to hang the film on because I really wanted to tell a narrative film, not a sort of impressionistic film, as much as I wanted to tell a story with this film. But having said that, we knew when Gabe was on the porch and he just doesn't shut up, which is just the gift of any documentary filmmaker would tell you that the person that can't stop talking on camera is often the greatest gift to the world. And in fact, if you look at some of the best characters in movie documentary history, you'll see it's a lineup of people who just literally cannot stop themselves from talking. And Gabe is a gift in that way. He was totally uncynical about the whole process, he really felt like he could open up, and which just made him great. And so I think that night on the porch, which was the second night, the first day that Sean was in town filming, we knew that like he could be the heart of the thing. And then when his match happened, we knew there was a movie, pretty much. The next question from the same person is, did the wrestlers in the film mainly watch WWE, or were they big wrestling nerds into Puro and indie stuff? Some of the guys are really into indie stuff. I think they Ring of Honor, and like I know Zayn is a big indie wrestling fan. I don't know how deep that goes. Some of them don't even watch anymore. I don't think Chris Solar necessarily even watches Raw or whatever WWE anymore. A lot of times I'm updating him with storylines and stuff, and but they all follow it still, or they follow it, but there's varying degrees of nerddom. I'm probably a little bit more of a wrestling nerd than they are, but I kind of stick mainly to the mainstream stuff and only because of time. I mean, because every time Ring of Honor, when you see a great Ring of Honor match, it's the best thing you could ever see. I just wish I had more time to follow it. And then this nice person says that the editing of Gabe's match was great. By the way, that was a fun thing to edit because it was so alive when we were filming it that basically we just didn't. As long as we didn't screw it up, we knew that we would be okay. And it was. Yeah, I mean, it's actually kind of difficult to edit a wrestling match because you want to get the sensation that you're watching the actual match unfold, but you have to cut out a lot because there's a lot of times that, it wasn't, a lot of time, just a lot of dead space that you can't have the 15-minute match be there. It needs to be 5 minutes. So it was a tricky thing to make it feel organic, like you're actually watching the whole film. The next question is, you mentioned Sean, the cinematographer, a few times, and that he is negative. Could you beat him in a cage match? Well, Sean's bigger than I am, but I have fury in my heart, and yes, I could defeat Sean in a cage match. He would act all tough, but then I have 2 children, so I'm used to to fighting all the time, and my son wrestles all the time, and he's 3 years old, and that may sound like this is his present, by the way, from WrestleMania, which I just went to. I got him a spinner belt, even though the spinner belt is now defunct in the WWE. I got my son a spinner belt, but he's vicious and he hits me really hard, and I think he probably hits harder than Sean would. So I would destroy Sean in a cage match. And if Sean, I know not Sean would never waste his time on watching a silly Q&A on the internet, but if he ever did, and if you ever saw this, the challenge has been laid down. I'll kill him. I don't know if that's a good place to end it, but if there's any more questions, feel free to ask me. Okay, that seems to be it. Craig, are we? I don't know how much of a delay we're at. Hold on, I'm gonna look at Twitter for a second, everyone. Hey, my brother tweeted at me. Okay, this guy named Derek Talon says on Twitter, "Now I can't wait to own Fake It So Real so I can show it to my brother. Great movie, awesome." I'm responding to him via Twitter. Okay, thanks so much, everyone. This is super cool. Thanks, Kentucker. Thanks, NoBudge. Thanks, Factor 25. Wait. Hold on. Here we go. Wait, nope. My thanks are do you have a strategy to attract non-wrestling fans? Is a question. I don't know that there's a strategy because it's weird. I don't know if wrestling fans need to still see the film. Wrestling fans still need to see it. I want to attract all fans because I think that the strategy is just basically having as many people say as you can that this is not a film just for wrestling geeks. The biggest compliment I ever get is from people who say I didn't realize that I could have so much in common with pro wrestlers in Lincolnton, North Carolina, and I don't think they don't mean that condescendingly. They just mean that literally they didn't think they have much in common. So that's a super cool thing to hear. So I just want people to see it because I think when people see it, they realize it's not violent in a way that could turn people off that aren't fans of wrestling, and it's not nerds talking about wrestling the whole time. It's got a heart to it that's something else. I'm realizing I really look like my father. Maybe it's because I'm getting old and getting gray, but I feel like this makes me look like my dad, which is weirding me out. All right. So Craig's last question is, what's your workflow when you edit? Any regular gear, camera wise, sound wise? I'm a low budget, no budge through and through filmmaker. I shot this on the DVX 100B, which is a DV camera, and I'm shooting my next film on a DVX 100B. I probably need to get people to help me advance my style or something, because I'm doubting that anyone's going to accept my DV films starting after this next one. But I think that camera is amazing, and it does exactly what I wanted to do, and I think you can make beautiful films with it. And I hate the 5D. So luckily that's passing, and people are now using better cameras. I just hate a lot of the stuff that I've seen great films shot with a 5D, and I've seen a lot of crap shot with it. So I got kind of like clingy to my old DV camera, and I use shotgun mics and lav mics, and it's just a matter of trying to not take the stuff that really stinks. Just basically someone said this good sound in my films, and I'm always like, that's shocking. So it must just be because I've figured out a way to cut all the really crappy stuff out. So that's it. So thank you so much. And Kentucker says a nice thing here. Please support this film, spread it around, and buy it on iTunes or through Factory 25. Also check out Robert's other films. Thanks, Kentucker. That's awesome. So I think the DVD will be ready sometime soon. We don't know, because we're doing something special with the DVD, which is we're creating this cool booklet, and Factory 25 puts together amazing DVDs, which sometimes take longer to make because they're very handmade, which fits with the film. So as soon as the DVD is ready, I'll be talking about it constantly. And thanks everybody for doing this, and thanks for asking questions, and thanks for Kentucker, and thanks for Craig for leading the Q&A. And thanks for Factory 25, and thanks for everybody in the whole world. Thank you. Okay, there's I guess that's it. Thanks so much. Goodbye.